The knock was soft, not a fist, not the kind of knock that meant trouble or debt or someone who had something to prove. It was the sound of small knuckles doing their best to sound grown up, and it was so faint that Bear almost did not hear it over the hum of the window unit and the slap of cards on the table. He heard it on the second one. He set his hand down face first. Lou looked up. Doc kept his eyes on his cards, but his fingers went still. Cody, the youngest of them by 20 years, turned toward the door like a dog that had caught a scent it could not place. Earl did not move at all, just sat there with his beer halfway to his mouth and let it stay there. Bear crossed the room in 4 strides. He was not a man who moved quickly, not anymore, not at 61 with 2 bad knees and a left shoulder that had been rebuilt twice. But he moved with intention the way a man moves when he has learned the difference between a threat and something else entirely, and he was already deciding it was something else before he reached the door. He opened it. She was standing on the top step. 5 years old, maybe. Blonde curls that had not been brushed in at least a day. Pink sneakers with the laces undone on both feet. A backpack that came almost to her waist, printed all over with cartoon flowers in yellow and purple. She had a stuffed rabbit hanging from her left hand by its ear. The ear had been chewed flat. The rabbit's left eye was missing. She looked up at Bear the way children look at something very large when they have already decided it is safe. Not fearless, not reckless, just decided. She did not say anything. She reached up with her free hand and held it out, palm up, the way a child holds out a hand when she wants to be taken somewhere. Bear looked at her for a long moment. He looked past her at the yard, at the gravel, at the road beyond the fence. No car, no adult standing at a distance. No one. The October afternoon light lay flat and thin over everything, the kind of light that comes late in the season when the sun has lost its ambition and just lies down across the landscape without committing. Pine took her hand. He brought her inside and closed the door behind them. The 4 men at the table did not say a word. Lou, who had been about to call a raise, set his chips down without counting them. Doc folded his hand without looking at it. Cody opened his mouth and then thought better of whatever he had been about to say and closed it again. Earl watched her cross the floor with an expression Bear could not immediately read. It was not surprise. It was something older than surprise. Something that lives behind the eyes of a man who has been waiting, without fully admitting to himself that he was waiting for something specific to arrive. Bear pulled out the chair closest to the table, and the girl climbed up onto it without being asked. She looked at the cards. She looked at the beer bottles. She looked at the half-eaten sandwich in front of Lou's place. She shook her head slightly the way a child shakes her head when she has seen something she has decided against without being told why. Then she pointed at the water glass near Doc's elbow. Doc slid it across without hesitation. She drank half of it in 2 long pulls. Then she set it down and held the rabbit in her lap and looked at each of them in turn. Not frightened, assessing, like she was checking something against a list she had been given and was marking off names. No one spoke. Bear pulled a chair around and sat near her, not directly across from her, not looming over her, just nearby and angled slightly, the way you sit when you want someone to know you are available without feeling like they are being interrogated. He had spent 30 years around people who did not immediately say what was going on, and he had learned long ago that the fastest way to get to the center of something was often to sit near the edge of it and wait. She seemed to appreciate this. She drank the rest of the water. She looked at the window. She looked at the door. She looked at each man again, slower this time, the second pass more thorough than the first. She was doing what her mother used to do, Bear realized. She was reading the room. She was 5 years old, and she was doing it the way her mother had done it at 22, with a patience and a thoroughness that did not match her age. After 10 minutes, she got down from the chair and walked across the room to the wall where the club's photographs were hung. There were 40 years of them, gatherings and rides, and the occasional formal portrait men, standing in rows in front of bikes, the light always either too bright or too flat. She moved along the wall, slowly looking at each one. Cody made a move to go after her, and Bear shook his head once. Cody settled back. She moved along the wall the way museum visitors move, not hurrying, giving each thing its proper amount of attention. She stopped at the third photograph from the left. She stood in front of it for a long moment. She reached up and put one finger on the glass. Bear knew that photograph without looking at it. It was from a summer gathering 14 years ago, 8 men in front of the clubhouse, bikes behind them. Cole was in the center of it, the way Cole tended to be in the center of things, grinning with his arm around a man who had since moved away. Maddie had taken that photograph. She was not in it. She was behind the camera. The girl looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she turned around and came back to the table and climbed back into her chair and looked at Bear. My mommy had a picture like that, she said, with motorcycles. What did it look like? Bear said, she thought. There were men standing, and one man in the middle was smiling very big. My mommy said she took the picture. Lou made a sound. He pressed his fist to his mouth. Bear said, do you know who the man in the middle was? My daddy, she said simply. The room went very still. She reached down and found the rabbit and put it in her lap, and then she looked at Bear again with those patient, clear eyes, and she said, my mommy said my daddy was here. She said the men here were his family. She said they would be my family too. Bear looked at the photograph on the wall. He looked at Cole in the center of it, grinning with his whole face the way Cole grinned. He looked at the date written in the corner in small printed numbers. He looked at the girl. What is your name? Sweetheart, he said. Lily, she said. That was 30 minutes ago. Now she was standing in front of Bear, with her small hand resting on his forearm, and her fingertip was on the tattoo just above his wrist. She was tracing it, slowly, carefully, the way you trace something you already know by heart. The way you trace something you have been told about so many times, it lives in your muscle memory, even though you have never touched it before today. The tattoo was old. 23 years on Bear's skin, the lines softened at the edges, the ink settled into something between blue and black. A skull, a rose growing out of the left eye socket petals, curling upward toward the wrist, and worked into the stem of the rose in script, so small you had to lean close to read it 2 letters. M.K. Maddie Keller. She had asked him to get it the summer she and Cole got serious. She had been 22 years old and she had picked out the design herself, a sketch on a torn piece of notebook paper that she had pushed across a diner table to him one morning with her coffee cup still in her other hand. She said she wanted to know that somewhere in the world there was someone who would carry her name on his body. Not because of anything romantic, because she had said she did not have family. And she needed to know that someone had claimed her, even sideways, even the biker way. Bear had gotten it the following week. Maddie had gotten the same image on her right shoulder 6 months later. Same skull, same rose, same letters. She said it was so they matched. Cole had teased her about it for a month. Cole had been dead for 7 years and 3 months. Maddie had been gone for 7 years and 2 months. The little girl's finger stopped. She leaned in close. Her curls fell forward over her face as she brought her nose to within an inch of his forearm. She was smelling it or examining it or doing something between the two that only made sense to a 5-year-old. Then she straightened up. She looked Bear in the eye, and she said 4 words. My mommy had that. The room stopped. Not the room. The air in the room, the sound of the window unit still ran. The card Lou had been about to pick up was still between his fingers. But every man at that table lost the ability to be anywhere, but exactly here in this moment with this child, with those 4 words suspended in the middle of the room like something that had been dropped from a great height and had not yet hit the floor. Bear found his voice first. He made himself keep it level. He made himself keep his face still. He crouched down onto one knee, his joints complaining loudly enough that the girl glanced down at the sound, and he brought his eyes level with hers. Honey, he said, where is your mommy now? She looked at him for a moment. Her expression was patient. The way a child looks when she has rehearsed an answer or been told what to say or has said it so many times in her own head that saying it out loud is no longer the hard part. She went to sleep, she said. She did not wake up. The sound Doc made was barely audible, a breath through the nose. Lou set the card down without looking at it. Cody's hand moved toward the water glass and then stopped like he had forgotten what he was reaching for. Bear kept his eyes on the girl. When did she go to sleep, sweetheart? She thought. Her eyes moved sideways the way children's eyes move when they are counting. 2 times the moon got big, she said. Doc closed his eyes. 2 full moons, roughly 60 days, roughly 2 months ago. Where were you when she went to sleep? In our house. She said it simply, a fact. Where is your house, honey? She thought again. It has yellow walls, she said, and a cat. The cat's name is Mr. Boots, but he ran away when the lady came. She frowned slightly as if the cat running away was the most troubling part of recent events. He does not like strangers. What lady? The lady who took me to the bus. She glanced toward the door, then back at Bear. She said I should find the men with the patches. She gave me a piece of paper. She said the men with the patches would know what to do. Bear looked at Cody. Cody was already moving. He went to the backpack she had left on the floor beside her chair. He crouched over it, unzipped it slowly the way you unzip something belonging to a child when you do not want to startle her. Inside a box of crackers, 2 apples in a plastic bag, folded pajamas, a small zippered pouch made of blue canvas. He opened the pouch. He went still. He held up a photograph. It was a standard print 4x6, the kind that gets developed at a drugstore. The colors were a little washed out the way drugstore prints go. A woman standing beside a road. Long blonde hair a braid over one shoulder, wearing a blue flannel shirt 2 sizes too big. A baby on her hip, maybe 4 months old, still at the age where babies look surprised to be in the world. Behind the woman leaning against a fence post at the roadside, a motorcycle. A heritage softail burgundy and chrome. Bear knew the bike. He knew every scratch on it. He had helped Cole pick it out. The woman was Maddie. The baby was looking at the camera with wide, pale eyes. The baby had blonde curls. Nobody in the room said a word. The girl was watching their faces. She had turned around from Bear and was watching each of them the way she had watched them when she first came in, methodical, patient. She seemed to understand that something significant was happening. She did not seem afraid of it. Bear straightened up. His knees screamed. He did not care. He walked to the window. Not because there was anything to see there, because he needed 4 seconds where no one was watching his face. He looked at the yard, the gravel, the fence, the road, the flat afternoon light lying over everything the way it always did in October in Arizona, bleached and thin and final. Hunt saw Maddie, not the photograph, the real one. The first time Cole had brought her to a club gathering 9 years before he died. She had ridden on the back of his bike, which was the first unusual thing because Maddie did not ride on the back of things. She was a front seat woman or a driving woman or a walking woman. Cole had spent 2 weeks convincing her that the bike was worth it. She had walked into a room of 38 men and she had looked at every one of them. Just looked. Not performing, not flirting, not trying to establish anything. Just looking, like she was reading something. Bear had watched her do it. He had watched her eyes move from face to face, something working behind them that he had not seen in a woman her age, something careful and deliberate and older than 22. She had looked at Bear first. She had held the look for a long second, and then she had nodded once, like she had confirmed something. Then she had looked at Doc, then at Earl. That was the order that mattered. The order that Bear understood later she had assigned to people she had decided she could trust. Cole used to joke that Maddie had chosen his crew before she chose him. I was probably right. Bear turned around. Earl was looking at the floor. Bear said Earl. Earl did not look up. Earl, Bear said again. Quiet. The way you say a man's name when you have already understood something and you are giving him the chance to understand it first. Earl looked up. There was something on his face that Bear had not seen there in many years. It was not grief. It was the thing underneath grief. The thing that lives in the body of a man who has been carrying something too long, that starts to look less like guilt and more like exhaustion, that makes a man's face look older than his years and younger than his decisions. Bear said, you knew. It was not a question. Lou stood up. What, Bear? What are you? Sit down, Lou. Lou sat. Doc set his coffee down. He was looking at Earl. Earl opened his mouth. He closed it. He ran both hands down his face and left them over his mouth for a moment, his fingers pressed against his lips, and then he dropped them. He looked at Bear. He looked at the girl. He said, she made me swear. The room was very quiet. The girl had climbed back onto her chair. She had the rabbit in her lap. She was watching Earl with the same patient, assessing look she had given all of them. Somehow, without any of them quite noticing how it happened, she had become the still center of the room. Everything turned towards her and around her the way a wheel turns around the thing at its center that does not move. Doc said, start at the beginning, Earl. Earl nodded. He put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them. Old hands, a mechanic's hands scarred at the knuckles, permanently stained at the nail beds in a way that never fully washed out. 3 days after Cole's funeral, he said, she came to my house. He stopped. He seemed to be deciding how much of it to say all at once. She was 8 months pregnant. I did not know she was pregnant. Nobody did. He glanced up quick. She had been hiding it. She was scared. She said, he stopped again, swallowed. She said somebody in the club had set Cole up, that it was not just a rival hit, that somebody had given information. She did not know who. She had a suspicion and she would not name it. She just said she could not trust anyone with a patch, not after what happened. Lou started to say something. Bear silenced him with a look. You believed her, Doc said. I believed she believed it. Earl's jaw tightened. I know that is not the same thing, but I looked at her standing on my porch, 8 months pregnant, her husband in the ground for 3 days. And I asked myself if a woman who was wrong would look like that. He shook his head. She did not look wrong. She looked like a woman who had done her math and was terrified of the answer. And you swore, Bear said. I swore. To do what exactly? Earl was quiet for a moment. To not tell anyone where she was going. To not tell anyone the baby existed. And two, he stopped. He pressed his lips together. To be the one she could call if she needed something, if something went wrong. The silence stretched out. Bear said, and then what? Then she left. She drove out of my driveway, and I did not know where she went, and I did not ask. He paused. She called me 6 weeks later. She had found a place. She gave me an address. She told me the baby was a girl. She told me, his voice changed fractionally, got quieter, not weaker, quieter. The way a man's voice changes when he is handling something carefully. She told me the baby's name. Cody said very softly, what name? Earl looked at the girl. The girl was already looking at him. She said, my name is Lily. The sound Cody made in his throat was involuntary. Lou looked away. Doc looked at his hands. Bear had to sit down. He pulled out the chair nearest him and sat down in it and put his elbows on his knees. He was 61 years old and he had been in rooms where terrible things happened, where men died and money was lost and promises were broken, and he had managed himself through all of it because that was what you did. You managed yourself. You were the steadiest thing in the room and you let other men use your steadiness to find their footing. He sat down. Lily watched him. Bear, she said. He looked up. He did not know until that moment that she had already learned his name. My mommy said she told him that the biggest man would have a skull and a rose on his arm. She said the biggest man would know what to do. She looked at his forearm. She was right, Lily said, about the skull and the rose. Bear looked at his arm. He looked at the letters worked into the stem, MK. He said, your mommy was right about a lot of things, sweetheart. She said you were the safest, Lily said. She said it matter-of-factly like a child reporting on something she has memorized. She said if she could not get to you herself, she would send me. Bear looked at Earl. Earl looked at the table. 2 months ago, Bear said. It was not quite a question. Earl nodded. The neighbor called me. Her name is Vera Flynn. She had Vera's number on the fridge. Vera said she had come home from her afternoon walk and found Maddie on the kitchen floor. The paramedics said it was a stroke. She was 36 years old. Cody made a sound. Doc put one hand over his mouth. Vera called me because I was the emergency contact. She kept Lily for 2 weeks while things were handled. Then Vera put her on the bus. Vera had an address, not the clubhouse address. A P.O. box I set up years ago. The letter forwarded to me. It told me what had happened and what Maddie wanted. He paused. It told me to come get Lily and bring her here. Bear looked at him. You have had the letter for 2 weeks. Yes, and you did not come. Earl did not answer. Bear let the silence sit for a moment. Then he said more quietly, because you could not. Earl looked up. His eyes were dry. He was not a man who cried, but there was something in them that was very close to the shape of it. She made me the keeper of it, he said. The whole thing, everything she had built, the life she had made, the way she had chosen to disappear. As long as Lily was in that house, it was still Maddie's story, still hers. The moment I walked Lily through that door, it was over. All of it. Everything Maddie spent 7 years protecting. His voice lowered. I was not ready to be the man who ended it. The room held this. After a long moment, Doc said, Cody. Cody looked at him. Fire up the kitchen. Make her a grilled cheese. Cody stood up without another word. He went. Doc looked at Bear. He gestured toward the back room with a tilt of his head. Bear, he crouched down in front of Lily one more time. His knee protested. He ignored it. Sweetheart, he said, Cody is going to make you something to eat. You like grilled cheese. Lily considered this seriously. With the crusts cut off, I will tell him. She nodded. She settled back in her chair like a woman sitting down to business. She set the rabbit on the table in front of her, with his remaining eye facing the kitchen. Bear stood up. He looked at Earl. Come on, he said. The three of them went into the back room. Small, low ceiling, a high window with iron bars against the outside light. The smell of old wood and oil. Doc closed the door. He looked at Earl. All of it, he said, everything you know. Earl talked for 20 minutes. He told them about the twice-yearly visits, the ways he had covered his tracks, the stories he had told hunting trips, visits to a brother in Nevada he did not have. He told them about Lily learning to walk, learning to talk, losing her first tooth, starting school. He did not describe these things with sentiment. He described them the way a man describes things he has been carrying for a long time and is finally setting down carefully in the right place piece by piece. Lily at 18 months, pulling herself upright, using the legs of the kitchen table in a house Earl had never seen the inside of because Maddie always came to meet him at a diner within driving distance, never the same one twice. Lily at 2.5, talking in the complete sentences that children her age rarely managed because Maddie had talked to her the way you talk to someone who will understand you if you give them the words. Lily at 3 asking Earl the first time she met him why his hands were always dirty, and Earl saying because he worked with engines, and Lily asking what an engine did, and Earl spending 45 minutes explaining it to a 3-year-old while Maddie drank her coffee and watched with an expression that Earl had never been able to name, but that he had thought about many times since. Lily at 4 drawing a picture at a diner table and presenting it to Earl at the end of the visit as something he was expected to keep. He had kept it. It was in his truck right now in the glove compartment, the paper worn along the folds from being opened and closed. Bear listened. He did not say much. He had learned a long time ago that the moments that required the most listening were always the ones that made you want to say the most. When Earl was done, Doc was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did right by her." Earl looked up, surprised. "I mean it. You did what she asked. You kept the girl safe. Whatever else you should have done or could have done, you kept that little girl safe for 7 years." Doc's voice did not waver. "That is not nothing, Earl." Earl nodded. Once he looked at the floor. Bear said, "There is something else." Both men looked at him. The men who came around the yellow house, asking about Maddie and the baby. He looked at Earl. Vera mentioned them in the letter. Earl hesitated. She mentioned that someone came around asking questions about a month before Maddie died. She said Maddie had locked up the house and gone very quiet after that. She said Maddie had been on the phone more, moving things around like she was reorganizing something. Bear let that sit. "She knew they were getting closer," he said. "I think so. And she sent Lily here anyway." "Yes, because here was the only place she could send her." Earl did not answer. He did not need to. They went back out. Lily was sitting with Cody. The grilled cheese was on a plate in front of her, cut into 4 squares, crust removed. She was eating with both hands, not because she had bad table manners, but because she was hungry enough that the usual rules had been temporarily suspended. The rabbit sat beside the plate. The rabbit's one good eye seemed to be watching the sandwich. Bear sat down across from her. He watched her eat. She looked up at him between bites and smiled, a full open smile, cheese on her lower lip. The kind of smile a child gives when they have decided that a place is safe and they are comfortable letting you know it. Bear's chest did something complicated. He had not had children. There had been a time when it seemed like a possibility back before the life had shaped itself into what it became. It had not happened. He had made his peace with that, or he had told himself he had. He had told himself that for many years and had more or less believed it the way you believe things that are true enough and are not going to change regardless. He looked at Lily eating her grilled cheese and he thought about all the things she had already lived in 5 years that she should not have had to live, and about the woman who had made sure she arrived here safe regardless, and about the father she had never met, who was in the center of a photograph on the wall behind her grinning with his whole face. "I thought she has Cole's jaw." He had not noticed it until now, the set of it, the particular way she held her chin when she was eating, a little forward, a little certain. That was Cole. That was unmistakably Cole. Lily ate the last square of her sandwich. She drank the rest of the water. She yawned enormously with no self-consciousness whatsoever, and then she climbed down from her chair and walked to the old couch along the wall and lay down on it, pulling her rabbit against her chest. Doc draped his cut over her. He took it off his own shoulders and laid it over her like a blanket. She was asleep in under 2 minutes. The 5 men sat around the table. Nobody said anything for a long time. The light through the window moved as the sun dropped. The room went warmer, then cooler. Someone refilled the water glasses. The ashtray on the end of the table held a dead cigarette from an hour ago that nobody had cleared. Bear looked at the couch. He looked at the small shape under the leather, the blonde curls visible above the edge, the worn sneaker that had come halfway off and was hanging from her toes. He looked at the photograph still lying on the table. Maddie, the baby, the bike. He turned the photograph over. On the back in handwriting, he recognized from notes left on refrigerators a decade ago, in a folded piece of notebook paper with a tattoo design on it. 3 words. She found you. Bear read it twice. He set it down carefully. I was about to say something, about to open his mouth and say whatever came next when Doc's hand went up. Bear stopped. Doc was looking at the window, not moving, his hand flat in the air. Headlights swept across the glass, not the soft wash of a car passing on the road. The deliberate slow arc of a vehicle turning into the gravel lot in front of the clubhouse. Pulling up, stopping. Bear was on his feet before he knew he was moving. I went to the window. He moved to the side of it, not in front of it at old habit, and he lifted the edge of the curtain with one finger and looked. A black SUV, late model, darkened windows, sitting in the gravel with the engine still running and the headlights still on, pointing at the front of the building like a question that expected a specific answer. Lou was up. He had the pistol from his waist in his hand before Bear could tell him to wait. Cody moved without being asked. He crossed to the couch in 3 steps and positioned himself between Lily and the door. Earl stood where he was. He was looking at the window with an expression Bear recognized. That was the look of a man who had been expecting something and had arrived at the moment when expectation became reality and found it no less heavy for having been anticipated. Bear said, Earl. I know, Earl said. Is this them? Earl was quiet for a second. 3 weeks ago, Vera called me. She said a man came by the house, said he was from social services asking about Lily, but he had no ID. He left a business card with just a phone number. No name, no agency. Lowe said, how long did you have this? 3 weeks, Earl said. 3 weeks you had this, and you did not. Lou. Bear cut him off without looking at him. Later. He turned to the window again. How many? 3 car doors opened. 3 men got out. They moved the way men move when they have done this kind of work before and know exactly what it looks like when they are trying not to look like they are doing it. Jeans, dark jackets. One of them wore a baseball cap pulled low. They walked toward the front door in the particular formation of men who have thought about what they are walking into. Bear watched their hands. The hands were where everything lived. The hands were where the next 30 seconds would be decided. I went to the door. He did not open it yet. He looked back at the room. Doc was by the back door. Lou had shifted to put himself at an angle to the front window. Cody had not moved from the couch. Earl had moved to stand between the table and Lily. Bear looked at Lily. She was still asleep. He opened the door. The lead man was perhaps 40, clean-shaven with the kind of face that had been carefully arranged into something neutral. Eyes that were doing the exact same thing Bear's eyes were doing, moving, measuring, cataloging exits and positions in the weight of the air in a room. The man looked at Bear. Bear leaned against the door frame. He filled it. He had spent 61 years filling door frames, and he was good at it. Help you, Bear said. We are here for the child, the man said. His voice was flat, practiced. Whose child? The child's mother passed away approximately 2 months ago. We represent the family. We are here to bring her home. Bear said, what family? That is not information I am able to share at this time. Then I am not able to help you at this time. The man's expression did not change. Sir, this is a welfare matter. The child is a minor with no legal guardian. We are authorized. Show me the authorization. A pause. That documentation is being processed. Then come back when it is done. Something shifted in the man's face. Just a degree. Just enough that Bear caught it. Sir, I would encourage you to consider your position here carefully. Bear said, my position is this door. What is yours? The man looked past him. Bear watched his eyes track across the room. They moved to the left, to the right. They cataloged what they could see. And then they stopped. They stopped on the couch. They stopped on the small shape under the leather cut. The man looked at the sleeping child for exactly 1 second, one careful, deliberate second, and Bear saw what was in his eyes. It was not the look of a man retrieving something that belongs to someone. It was the look of a man confirming something that has been lost for a very long time. It was the look of completion, of a job not quite finished, of a loose thread being finally located. Bear stepped forward into the frame. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. You are not here for her family, he said. There is no family. You are here because 7 years ago somebody did not finish something, and you have been looking for it ever since. And you found it tonight, and now you are looking at me. He let that land. Take a good look, he said. The man was still for a moment. His two companions had stopped 3 feet behind him. One of them had his hands in his jacket pockets. Bear was watching those pockets. We will be in touch, the lead man said. You do that, Bear said. And when you come back, you bring every man you have, because every one of them is going to need a ride home. The man looked at him for another second. Then he turned around. He walked back to the SUV. The other two followed. They got in. The engine shifted into reverse. Bear watched the taillights all the way down the road until they vanished into the dark. He closed the door. He locked it. He stood with his hand on the lock for a moment with his back to the room. Then he turned around. The four men inside were looking at him. So was Earl. So was Lily. Lily was awake. She was sitting up on the couch with the rabbit pressed against her chest and her eyes were open, and she was looking at Bear with the same expression she had given him when she first came in. Patient, assessing. He crossed to the couch. He crouched down. Hey, he said. You okay? I heard loud talking, she said. Yeah, it is okay now. Were those bad men? Bear looked at her for a moment. He thought about what to say. He thought about all the ways you could answer that question and all the things the answer would mean to a 5-year-old who had already been given more truth than most children her age, and who, from the evidence available, could handle truth better than most adults. Those men are going away, he said, and they are not coming back here the same way. She seemed to consider this carefully, turning it over in her mind with the deliberate attention she gave everything. Then she nodded once like she had checked it against something internal, and it held up. Okay, she said. She lay back down. She pulled the rabbit closer. Bear stayed crouched beside the couch until her breathing evened out, and her grip on the rabbit loosened, and her face went back to the uncomplicated expression of sleep. Then he straightened. He stood there with his back to the room for a moment looking at her. He turned around. Doc was at the table. He had poured coffee. There were 5 cups. He set one in front of the empty chair. Sit down, Doc said. Both of you, all of you. They sat. Doc folded his hands on the table. He looked at them. He looked at Bear last. I have something to tell you, he said. I should have told you 7 years ago. I did not. And I have to live with that. He was quiet for a moment. But I am going to tell you now because that little girl is going to need everything we know. And I am not going to let her carry what Maddie carried alone. Not for one more day. The room was very still. The coffee steamed in 5 cups. Outside the road was empty and the dark was complete. Doc said, 7 years ago, 2 days after Cole's funeral, I got a phone call. He let that sentence sit in the air for a moment, the way men let things sit when they know the next thing they are going to say will change the shape of the room permanently. Then he said the man who called was named Warren Pruitt. Doc said the name slowly, the way you say a name you have been holding in your mouth for 7 years and are finally allowing out. Warren Pruitt, Captain Warren Pruitt of the Arizona Department of Public Safety, Western Division, the man Doc had grown up 2 houses down from in a neighborhood outside Flagstaff, where the houses were small and the winters came early, and the kids who grew up there either left or never made it out at all. Doc and Warren had left. They had gone in entirely different directions, and they had arrived at an understanding the way some men arrive at understandings, not through sentiment or shared values, but through geography and time, and the knowledge that in certain kinds of situations, having a man you can call is worth more than having a man you can trust. It was a Tuesday when Pruitt called. Cole had been in the ground for 48 hours. The whole club had still been in that cotton muted state that follows a death, the state where the world keeps moving, but all of it seems to be happening at a slight remove, like watching a film through frosted glass. Doc had taken the call in his truck in the parking lot of a gas station 3 miles from the clubhouse. Pruitt had told him to come alone, and Doc had come alone because men like Pruitt did not say things like come alone unless they meant them. They met at a rest stop off the highway. 2 men in 2 cars parked side by side talking through open driver's side windows. The way men talk when they do not want witnesses and do not want any record of the conversation existing in any form that could be produced later. Pruitt had not looked good. He had the face of a man who had not slept in several days and had only just realized that not sleeping was not going to fix anything. I told Doc what he knew. 3 weeks before Cole was killed, Pruitt had picked up a young man on a possession charge. The young man was a prospect for Iron Verdict MC, 21 years old with no priors and a mother in Kingman who worked 2 jobs and needed him to not be in prison. Pruitt had leverage. He had used it. The prospect's name was Danny Briggs. Lowe made a sound at the table, something low and involuntary. Danny Briggs had been 21 years old when Cole died. He had been at the funeral in the second row wearing a dark jacket that was too big for him, in the shoulders, the way borrowed funeral clothes are always too big. He had been at the send-off that night at the clubhouse drinking more than he could manage, and he had cried in a corner of the lot when he thought no one was watching. Bear had seen him and had thought at the time that the kid was just young and had never been that close to a death before. He had thought the kid was grieving. He had been right that the kid was grieving. He had been wrong about what the kid was grieving for. 6 months after the funeral, Danny Briggs had wrapped his motorcycle around a tree on a stretch of highway outside Williams at 3 in the morning. The road had been straight and dry, and Danny had known every inch of it. He had been going very fast for a road you did not need to go fast on. The club had buried him with honors. He had not been a full member, but he had ridden with them for 11 months, and a man who had ridden with you deserved a send-off, and so they had given him one. They had lowered him into the ground with his patch in the coffin, and spoken about him with the particular care you speak about someone young who died too soon before they could become everything they might have been. Nobody had ever asked why Danny Briggs was riding that fast at 3 in the morning on a road he knew like the back of his hand. He told Pruitt about the run, Doc said. The weekend Cole was killed. He did not know. Doc stopped. He pressed 2 fingers against his lips for a moment. He thought Pruitt was going to use the information to set up an arrest, confiscation, maybe bring some charges against the club that could be worked down later. He did not know they were going to kill Cole. He was scared, and he was young, and he was sitting across from a man who had the power to take away the next 10 years of his life. And he made a choice he could not take back. Bear said, "Who killed Cole?" "A crew working out of Nevada." Pruitt did not know who had hired them. He only knew that information had passed from his office to parties he would not name. Parties he would not name. That was the phrase he used. Bear sat back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. So Pruitt squeezed a scared kid for information. The information got to the wrong people, and Cole got killed. And Pruitt called you to tell you this because why exactly? Because he said he felt that the club deserved to know it was not a rival hit, that it was the result of his word was negligence. He wanted me to know it was negligence, not malice, not a betrayal from inside. Doc's hands were very still on the table. He wanted absolution, and he was too smart to ask for it directly. He framed it as information. He told himself he was being honest. What he was actually doing was making himself feel better at my expense. And what did he want from you? Doc was quiet. He did not want me to pursue it. He had a career, he had a family. He said he had not been the one to pass the information along, that it had gone through other people in his office, but that he bore responsibility for creating the conditions. He said if I pursued it, people would look at everything, including things that had nothing to do with Cole. Lowe said Hy was covering himself. Yes, Doc said simply. He was covering himself, and I let him. The word "let" sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples of it moved outward and touched every man at the table. Bear said, "You let him." I made a judgment. Doc's voice did not change. It was not a defensive voice. It was the voice of a man who has had 7 years to examine something from every angle and has arrived at the clearest possible account of his own failure. Not an excuse, an account. I made a judgment that Cole's death was the result of cowardice and negligence rather than malice, that pursuing it would cost us more than we had already lost, and that letting it stay buried was the decision that protected the most people. He paused. I was wrong, and Maddie paid for it. Earl said slowly, she thought one of us gave Cole up on purpose. She thought someone in this room wanted him dead. Yes, and you could have told her it was not that. I tried, Doc said, twice in the first year. I sent word through people I trusted. She did not answer. By the time I had a way to reach her directly, she had moved again. And by the time I tracked the new location, he shook his head. She was already building something else. She was already further down a road than I knew. I decided that reaching her at that point would only confirm that she had been right not to trust us, that I had hidden something, that her fear had been justified. His jaw tightened, which it had been, even if not for the reason she thought. She raised that girl alone, Earl said, for 7 years because she did not know. I know, Doc said. She built a life out of nothing in a yellow house with a little girl on the floor next to her because she thought one of the men at this table had wanted her husband dead and she was not going to risk her daughter's life on being wrong about which one. I know, Doc said again. His voice was the same, steady. He was not going to let it be anything but steady because that was the only useful thing it could be right now. And I am saying it now. Everything I knew, everything I did, everything I chose not to do, I am saying it in front of all of you. And whatever comes of that, I will stand in it. The room was quiet again. Bear looked at his hands on the table. He looked at the coffee cup. He looked at the window where the night had fully arrived, and there was nothing beyond the glass but the dark. I thought about what Doc had said, and he tried to set aside his first reaction to it and look at it honestly. The first reaction was anger, the clean, simple anger of a man who has been kept in the dark about something that mattered. He set that aside. Behind the anger was something more complicated, something that recognized that Doc had been sitting with this for 7 years, the same way that Earl had been sitting with his version of it, the weight distributed differently but equally real. That the choices Doc had made had been wrong, and had also been the kind of wrong that a decent man makes when he is trying to protect too many things at once, and cannot see clearly enough to know which ones to let go. That was the kind of wrong Bear understood. After a long time, Lou stood up. He was a man who expressed things through movement. He stood up, he looked at Doc, and then he sat back down. That was all. For a man like Lou, that was the equivalent of a long speech. Cody had not said anything for a long time. His face had the look of a young man who has just understood that the world contains a kind of weight he had not previously calculated, and that some of that weight is carried by the people you trust, and some of it is the weight of what they chose not to tell you, and all of it is present all the time, whether you know it is there or not. Bear looked at Earl. Danny Briggs, he said. I know, Earl said. You rode with him for 11 months. I know. I was 21 years old and scared. Yes. And he spent 6 months trying to live with it, and he could not. Yes. Earl's voice was flat, not cold. Flat the way things go flat when they have been pressed too many times. He wrote Doc a letter. Doc nodded. He sent it to my house. He told me what he had done. He told me he could not live with it. He asked me to never tell anyone because his mother was still alive and he was the only thing she had. He asked me to bury him with honors. Doc looked at the table. I honored that. I had the letter burned. I told the club it was a road accident. I stood at his grave and I gave the eulogy myself. You gave the eulogy, Bear said. Yes, for the man whose fear got Cole killed. Yes. Doc's voice did not waver. Because he was 21 years old and he had been frightened and he had made a choice he could not live with. And his mother was in the front row in a black dress holding her handbag on her lap, and she had lost enough. Some things you bury for the sake of the living. That one I would do again. Bear looked at him for a long time. He said, all right, and he meant it, not as forgiveness exactly, as receipt, as the acknowledgement that something had been said and heard and would be accounted for. Not erased, not settled overnight, but received, heard by the right people finally and placed in the correct part of the record. He turned to Cody, the drive. Cody had been sitting with his laptop open in front of him. The flash drive was still in the port. He had been reading in silence for the last 20 minutes, and his face had gone the color of old clay. Talk to me, Bear said. Cody turned the laptop around. The file was a document, a long one, dense with text and names and dates and figures and what appeared to be scanned copies of bank records, photographs, printed emails with handwritten annotations in a careful angular script that Bear recognized immediately. Maddie had always written that way. Precise, clear, nothing wasted. She started it before Lily was born, Cody said. There are entries dated back to 7.5 years ago. She was building it while she was still pregnant. Bear pulled the laptop toward him. The names were organized into columns. Dates of contact, dates of payment, amounts, cross-references to other names and other amounts. Maddie had been methodical in a way that spoke of someone who understood that the difference between a case that holds and a case that collapses is in exactly this kind of detail, the kind you gather at 3 in the morning while your daughter sleeps in the next room and you cannot afford to get any of it wrong. She had been doing this for 7 years. She had been doing it alone. Bear read. He read the first page and the second page and the third page, and on the third page halfway down he found a name. He stopped. I looked up. He said, Doc. Doc looked at him. Warren Pruitt. Doc's expression did not change. His eyes moved to the screen. He read for a moment in silence. This is not just coal, he said. No, Bear said. It is not. He looked around the table. Lou had come around to read over Doc's shoulder. Cody was looking at the floor. Earl had not moved from his chair. His hands were very still on the table. Bear said, she told us. Everyone looked at him. She left us 47 pages and a 5-year-old girl, he said. She told us everything she knew. She told us who and how much and when. She did not trust us enough to send it herself because she thought one of us was in it. But she trusted one thing. He looked at each of them. She trusted that the men with the patches would do what needed doing once they had the whole picture in front of them. Cody said, what does that mean for us right now tonight? It means Bear said that those men in the SUV are going to come back. And when they come back, it will not be 3 of them. He closed the laptop. And it means we need to be smarter than our first instinct. Lou said, what is our first instinct? Our first instinct is to find the 3 men who got out of that vehicle and make sure they do not get back in it. Bear looked at him. That instinct is wrong. Bear, that instinct is exactly wrong. We go after those 3 men. We make noise, we give Pruitt and whoever sits above him a reason to bring in every resource they have. We become the story. The club becomes the story, and Lily becomes evidence in someone else's case. He looked around the table. That is not what Maddie built this for. The room was quiet. Earl said, what did Maddie build it for? Bear thought about the photograph. The woman by the road with the baby on her hip and her dead husband's motorcycle behind her and everything she owned probably in the trunk of whatever car was parked just out of the frame. He thought about her walking into a room of 38 men and reading each one in a minute. He thought about a letter arriving at a P.O. box and a 5-year-old girl on a bus with a flash drive sewn into the ear of a one-eyed rabbit. She built it, he said, to end it. The whole machine. Not just the men who killed Cole, not just the crew that pulled the trigger. The whole quiet thing that has been running for 15 years. He tapped the laptop. She built it to end it in a way that cannot be walked back and cannot be hidden and cannot be explained away. She built it to last. He stood up. We make copies, he said. Tonight, multiple copies. One goes to a lawyer I trust in Phoenix. One goes to a reporter who owes me something from 8 years ago and has the kind of platform where this goes wide and stays wide. He paused. And one goes to an FBI field agent whose name is not in this document. Lou said, how do you know whose name is not in it? I do not, Bear said, but I know someone who will know which names are clean, and I know a retired state police investigator up in Prescott who spent 20 years looking at exactly this kind of operation and walked away from his job when he figured out who his supervisors were. He has been waiting for something like this for a long time. His name is Hal Decker. Doc said, Hal Decker. You know him. I know of him. He is the right man. Yes, Bear said. He is. The clock on the wall said 11:40. Bear looked at it. He looked at Lily asleep on the couch. Tonight we make copies, he said. Tomorrow we send them. The day after we call Decker. And between now and then, he looked at the table, at each of them. Nobody sleeps alone. Nobody goes anywhere without saying where. And that door does not open again tonight without me standing next to it. Lou nodded. Cody nodded. Earl nodded. Doc looked at the laptop. He looked at the sleeping child. He said, she spent 7 years alone with this. Yes, Bear said. She could have called. Any one of us. She could not, Earl said quietly. She could not call any of you because she did not know. She did not know who knew about Cole and who did not. She did not know who to trust. So she trusted herself. 7 years, alone in a yellow house. And she did more alone than most men could do with a full crew in 20 years. Nobody argued. Bear picked up the flash drive from the table. He looked at it for a moment. A small thing, the size of a thumb, the weight of nothing, the weight of everything. He set it back down carefully. Cody, he said, you know how to make copies that cannot be traced back to us. Yes. How long? Cody looked at the laptop. 2 hours if I am careful. Be careful, Bear said. Be very careful. Cody took the laptop and the drive into the back room. The door closed behind him. The remaining 4 men sat around the table. After a while, Doc got up and made more coffee. He brought it back without being asked and refilled the cups that were empty and left the ones that were not and sat back down. He set a 5th cup on the table at the empty space where Cody usually sat. They sat in the hum of the window unit and the sound of a sleeping child breathing and the coffee steaming in 5 cups, and none of them said anything for a long time. Outside, the Arizona night had settled fully in. The desert dark was not the dark of a city or a suburb. It was a complete dark, enormous and indifferent. The kind of dark that reminds you of the size of the space you are in and the smallness of the circle of light you are able to make. Bear was thinking about Maddie. He let himself think about her, which was not something he did often or easily. There was a version of thinking about Maddie that was productive and a version that was not, and the line between them was thin. The productive version was the version where you thought about what she had done and what she had known and what she had left behind and what you were going to do with it. The unproductive version was the version where you thought about the years about the yellow house, about a 36-year-old woman on the kitchen floor of a house you had never seen. He tried to stay in the productive version. I thought about the file. 47 pages, 7 years of work. She had done it the way she did everything carefully and completely and without announcing it to anyone. She had built something that would last because she understood the way methodical people understand that the things that last are the things built without shortcuts. The things you do correctly even when no one is watching, and even when you are exhausted, and even when it would be easier to set it aside for another day. She had not set it aside. For 7 years with the child growing up on the floor beside her, she had not set it aside. At 12:30 in the morning, Lou's phone buzzed. He looked at it. He looked at Bear. They drove past, he said. Single pass, did not stop. They are mapping us, Bear said. Yeah, let them map. They will see what we want them to see. Lou put the phone away. He got up and went to the window and lifted the curtain an inch and looked out at the empty road. Then he let the curtain fall and went back to his chair and sat down. At 1 in the morning, Lily made a sound in her sleep. Not a crumb, a small sound, a word or the shape of a word, something brief and anxious that passed through her face. Her grip on the rabbit tightened. Bear went to the couch. He crouched beside her and put one hand very lightly on her back, just there, just present. She stilled. He stayed crouched there for a few minutes until her breathing had smoothed back out and the anxiety had left her sleeping face. Then he straightened up slowly and went back to the table. Doc was watching him. Bear said, "What?" Doc shook his head, not dismissively, thoughtfully. "Nothing," he said. "Just remembering something." "What?" Doc picked up his coffee. "The night Cole brought Maddie to the first gathering. You remember how she came in?" "Yes." "You remember who she looked at first?" Bear looked at him. "Me, then you, then Earl, in that order." "She looked at you first, and she nodded, and then she went and found Cole, and she never looked uncertain again after that." Doc set the cup down. "I always wondered what she saw." Bear thought about it. "Steadiness," he said. "She was looking for someone who would not move. And she found it. She found it in all three of us. Different kinds. But she found it." Doc was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She found it in the right places. Even after everything, the right places." Lou, who had been quiet for some time, said without looking at anyone, "She found it in the right places because she was the kind of person who knows what to look for." He paused. "Cole knew what he was doing when he married her." Nobody said anything to that. There was nothing to add to it. At 2 in the morning, Cody came back out. 3 USB drives in his palm, careful as a surgeon. He set them on the table one at a time. "Encrypted," he said. "All 3, different passwords. I will give you the passwords separately. The original stays here in the safe." Bear picked one up. He held it. "Good," he said. He set it back down. He looked at the clock. He looked at the couch. He looked at the 4 men around the table. "Somebody should try to sleep," he said. Nobody moved. "That is what I thought," he said. He pulled his chair around to face the door. He sat down in it with his elbows on his knees and his hands between them, and he looked at the door and he waited. Not anxiously. The way you wait when you have made your decisions and are ready for whatever comes next. And the only variable remaining is the timing. The night held. No sounds came from the road that were not the ordinary sounds of the desert at night. No lights swept across the window. The phone stayed quiet. Bear sat with it. He sat with the door, in the dark, in the specific quality of the silence in a room where 4 men are keeping watch without admitting that was what they were doing. He sat with the sound of a little girl breathing on a couch 15 feet away. He sat with the weight of 7 years of things said and unsaid and done and left undone. He sat with Cole. He let himself sit with Cole in a way he did not usually allow. Not the loss of Cole exactly, though that was present too. The fact of Cole. The years of the fact, the way a person becomes inseparable from the shape of your life after long enough so that when they are gone, there is not a hole where they were so much as a different shape to everything else. A shape you only notice when you look at things that used to have them in the frame. Cole at this table, Cole on this road, Cole on the bike in the photograph leaning against the fence post with the burgundy paint and the scratch on the fender. Cole at 43 stopped mid-sentence. Bear thought you had a daughter. You never knew it. She is asleep on the couch with your wife's rabbit, and she has your jaw and your wife's eyes, and she walked in here today, and she was not afraid because her mother told her the men with the patches would know what to do. I thought we are going to do what needs doing. I thought it is going to be enough. The gray light came at the bottom of the sky just before 6. Bear heard Lily wake up before he heard her move. The quality of her silence changed, became inhabited. Then the small sounds of a child sitting up. He turned. She was sitting up with the rabbit in her lap, her curls pressed flat on one side from sleep. She looked at the room. She looked at the window where the first light was coming through. She looked at Bear. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Bear said. "Did you sleep?" "No." She considered this. "That is okay," she said. "Sometimes I do not sleep either, when I miss my mommy." Bear looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "that makes sense." She got off the couch. She padded to the window in her socked feet, and she looked out at the gray Arizona morning, at the gravel lot, at the fence, at the empty road. She said, "Are we safe here?" Bear said, "Yes." "For real, or are you just saying that?" He looked at her. "What is the difference?" She looked back at him. "When my mommy said it for real, she looked at me while she said it. When she was just saying it, she looked somewhere else." Bear held her gaze. He did not look anywhere else. "For real," he said. She nodded. "Once. That was sufficient." She turned back to the window. "Can I have cereal?" she said. Bear stood up. He went to the kitchen. He found the cornflakes. He found the milk. He found a bowl and a spoon. He brought them to the table. She poured the cereal herself. She poured the milk herself. She ate with both hands wrapped around the bowl, watching the room come slowly to life around her, the men stirring one by one from their chairs, the Arizona morning arriving gray and clean through the window. Bear sat across from her and watched her eat. After a while, she looked up. "Bear," she said. "Yeah, my mommy said you always told the truth, even when the truth was not finished yet." Bear sat with that. "She said that was the other thing about the biggest man," Lily said. She put the spoon in her mouth. Her mouth chewed, swallowed, that he was honest about what he did not know yet. "Your mommy was right about that," Bear said. "So," she picked up another spoonful. "Do you know what you are going to do?" He looked at her. He thought about Decker. He thought about the lawyer. He thought about the reporter and the copies and the 47 pages and Warren Pruitt's name on page 3. He thought about the machine that had been running for 15 years and the woman who had spent 7 years alone in a yellow house building the thing that was going to stop it. "I'm working on it," he said. She nodded. She went back to her cereal. She seemed satisfied with that answer, which was the answer her mother had told her to expect. And she ate her breakfast in the quiet morning. And the men in the room around her sat with their coffee and their thoughts and the weight of everything they now knew and everything they were about to do. Bear had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch in the first week after Lily arrived. I was not a man who usually had trouble sleeping. He had spent 30 years learning to sleep in circumstances that did not invite it, on floors and trucks, in rooms that were too hot or too cold or too loud or too full of the particular quality of tension that lives in a space after something difficult has happened in it. He had learned that sleep was not something you negotiated with, but something you committed to, and that the commitment itself was usually enough. The first week after Lily arrived, the commitment was not enough. I would lie down and the room would be quiet and his eyes would close and he would be awake again in 40 minutes or an hour, lying in the dark with the specific alertness of a man who has assigned himself to something and whose body has decided that sleeping is incompatible with being assigned to it. He did not find this troubling. He recognized it. He had felt it before when Cole first brought Maddie around, and there had been 7 months of a specific kind of watchfulness. While he assessed her and decided whether she was real, whether she was going to stay, whether she was the thing it looked like she was. He had felt it when Cole died, a different version of the same alertness, the body refusing to stand down from a threat that was already over, because it had not yet been told what the new landscape looked like. This was that, a recalibration. His body deciding what was true now and what it needed to stay awake for and what it could let go. By the end of the first week, he was sleeping 5 hours. By the end of the second week, 6. By the end of the first month, he was sleeping the way he usually slept, which was completely and without drama. The sleep of a man who has made his decisions and is ready for whatever comes next. Lily slept well from the first night. He found this remarkable. She had arrived in a strange place with 5 men she had never met. She had learned in the course of an evening that the threat she had been carried here to escape was real and present. She had been taken to a small back room and given a bed with rabbit sheets and a lamp and told to sleep. She had slept. He asked her about it once a few weeks in. They were sitting at the table in the early morning, the two of them, the rest of the men still in their rooms or outside, and she was eating her cornflakes, and he was drinking his coffee, and the morning light was coming through the window. In that particular way, it came through in November, low and angular and very clear. He said, "Lily." She looked up. "When you first came here, were you scared?" She thought about this with the seriousness she brought to everything worth being serious about. She ate a spoonful of cereal. She thought some more. "Yes," she said, "but my mommy said I would be scared, and that being scared was okay. She said the men with the patches would be scary to look at, but that they would not be scary for real." And was she right? She looked at him. "You are scary to look at," she said, "but you are not scary for real." Which one was the most scary to look at? She considered. "Lou," she said. "Lou has a very serious face." "He does. But he made me a ham." She ate another spoonful. "People who make you things are not scary." Bear said, "That is a very good rule." "My mommy made things," Lily said. "She was a very good cook. She made soup when I was sick. She made it herself, not from a can." She said soup from a can was not the right kind of soup. She paused. "I think Lou's ham is the right kind of ham, not from a can." Bear said, "Lou would be very pleased to hear you say that." Lily looked toward the hallway. "Should I tell him?" "Yes," Bear said. "I think you should." She filed this away with the seriousness of someone making a note to follow up on and went back to her cereal. That was the texture of the mornings. That was what the first months were made of, the early mornings, with the cornflakes and the coffee and the low clear light and the particular quality of conversation that Lily brought to it, direct and curious, and without the self-consciousness that most children brought to conversations with adults. She had been raised by a woman who took her seriously. It showed in everything. Doc noticed it. He told Bear one afternoon when Lily was in the back room that he had spent 40 years around people who did not say what they meant, and that being around someone who said what she meant at all times was something he had not expected to find this restorative. Bear said that was Maddie's doing. Doc said he knew. He sighed it quietly, and he looked at the window. And Bear let it be what it was, which was an acknowledgement and a grief and a gratitude, all occupying the same space in the same breath. The weeks after Pruitt resigning passed in a specific kind of suspense. Not the acute suspense of immediate danger, not the held breath suspense of the night the SUV came and went, but the longer, quieter suspense of waiting for a process to complete the way you wait for a river to come down after a storm, knowing it is happening upstream, knowing it will arrive, watching the water, and waiting for the change. Bear watched the water. He received updates from Decker in brief, infrequent messages that said the minimum necessary. He cross-referenced what he heard from Decker against what appeared in the press, which was not much and not fast. Federal investigations moved at their own pace, and the press did not always follow them in real time. He read between what was reported and what was not reported, and he filled in the gaps with what he knew from the file and what Decker confirmed and what he had learned over 30 years of operating in a world that existed adjacent to the one that appeared in the news. He did not share most of this with the others, not because he wanted to hold it from them, but because the information was not yet solid enough to be worth the weight it would put on everyone to have it. He was waiting for things to be real before he made them present. Earl understood this without being told. Earl had been operating in the same adjacent world for the same 30 years, and he knew how to wait for things to be real. He watched Bear's face in the mornings and in the evenings, and he did not ask questions, and his silence was its own kind of steadiness. Lou did not understand this as instinctively, but he had enough trust in Bear's judgment to follow the shape of it. He channeled his impatience into mechanical things, into the shop work that had always been his most reliable way of getting through the days that asked a lot of him. He spent long hours in the shop, and he came in at the end of them with his hands dark with grease and his jaw unclenched, and he ate dinner and went to bed and got up and did it again. Cody spent his available energy on Lily, which was not a conscious decision, so much as a natural consequence of being the youngest of them, and therefore the one she found least threatening, and most like the version of a person her age understood how to interact with. He taught her things. She taught him things. The dynamic was more reciprocal than it appeared. She corrected him twice on facts he got wrong about animals. She was right both times. He did not tell anyone about this. Doc Reed. He had always read. He had a collection of books that lived in the back room of the clubhouse in a shelf he had built himself 20 years ago. And he spent his evenings with them the way some men spent their evenings with the television, with genuine absorption and without guilt. In the weeks after Pruitt's resignation, he read more than usual late into the nights, and Bear, passing his door at 2 in the morning on his way to the bathroom, would see the strip of yellow light under it and know that Doc was still awake and was making his peace with things in the way Doc had always made his peace with things. Through a long novel, through the specific suspension of a book, through the place where the world stopped pressing for a few hundred pages and let you breathe. Bear respected this. He had his own version of it. His was the road. When the process was finally complete and the last name from the file had been resolved and Decker's final message had arrived and said simply done, Bear had taken his bike out alone on a Tuesday afternoon, and he had ridden for 3 hours on the roads that ran east and then north and then circled back the roads. He knew the way. He knew his own hands, the roads that Cole had known the same way. He had not thought about anything in particular on that ride. He had let the road do what roads do, which is to empty you out by filling you with the specific and continuous attention that riding requires until you arrive back, where you started a little lighter than you left. He had come back to the clubhouse and parked the bike and gone inside, and Lily had been at the table doing her homework, which was a page of addition problems that she was working through with the focused intensity she brought to everything that had right answers. She had looked up at him. She had looked at his face. "You went somewhere," she said. "Rode for a while," he said. She looked at him for another moment. "You look better," she said. She said it simply as an observation. "I feel better," he said. She nodded. She went back to her addition. Bear got a glass of water and sat across from her and watched her work through the problems, her pencil moving steadily, her face intent. Outside, the late afternoon light was doing what it did in December, lying flat in gold across everything, making even the gravel in the lot look like it was worth looking at. He sat there and watched her and drank his water, and he thought that this was the thing Maddie had built toward. Not the file, not the 47 pages, not the resignations and the arrests and the quiet dismantling of a machine that had run for 15 years. All of that was necessary. All of that was the clearing of the ground. But this was what the ground had been cleared for. A little girl at a table doing addition problems in the afternoon light, her pencil moving steadily, her face intent, the sound of a correct answer being circled, and the pencil moving to the next problem. This was it. This was the whole of it. This was what a woman in a yellow house had worked toward for 7 years alone, carefully, without shortcuts, with a 5-year-old on the floor beside her, and a flash drive sewn into the ear of a one-eyed rabbit, and the understanding that she might not be there to see it. She had not been there to see it. But Bear was there to see it. And he thought, this is enough. This is exactly enough. This is what enough looks like when you have done the work and paid the cost and arrived at the other side of it with the thing you were trying to protect still intact. "I thought, Maddie, you were right. I thought we are going to take care of her." Lily circled the last answer on her page. She looked up at him. "All done," she said. "Good," Bear said. "Can you check them?" I took the page. He went through it. She had gotten all of them right. He handed it back. "All correct," he said. She looked at the page. She looked at him. "Really? Really?" She looked at the page again, with the expression of someone who has done something they were not completely certain they could do, and has found out that they could, the particular combination of satisfaction and surprise that belongs to that moment. Then she smiled, the open, complete smile. "Good," she said, and she got up to put her pencil away. The back room had been cleaned out and repainted by the end of the first week. Cody had done the painting yellow, the color she had said her old house was, and he had done it badly on the first pass because he had never painted a room in his life and had not thought to ask anyone how to do it before starting. The result of the first pass was streaky and uneven and had drips running down from the upper corners that dried into ridges you could feel if you ran your hand along the wall. He did a second pass. Better. The streaks were gone, but the color was still uneven, darker in some places than others. Slightly orange in the corner, near the window where the afternoon light came through and changed what the paint looked like from hour to hour. He did a third pass. By the third pass, it was right. The room was yellow clean, and even the same yellow that the Arizona sun puts into things that have been left in it long enough. The right yellow. Doc had ordered sheets with rabbits on them from a catalog. He had done it the day after Lily arrived before anyone had made any formal decisions about anything, because he was the kind of man who addressed the immediate problem in front of him and let the larger questions sort themselves out in their own time. The sheets had a white background and small brown rabbits in a repeating pattern, each rabbit in a slightly different pose. Lily had looked at them for a long moment when Doc unfolded them, and then she had looked at the rabbit in her hand, and then she had looked at Doc and said very seriously that the rabbits on the sheets looked like they were all going somewhere important. Doc had said that was exactly right. Lou drove 2 towns over the afternoon after the sheets arrived and came back with a stuffed bear the size of a small child. He carried it in from the truck without saying anything about where he had been or what he had done. He went into the back room and he set the bear at the foot of the bed, and he came back out and he sat down at the table and he picked up his coffee and he looked at the cards that were still in the middle of the table from the night before, and he did not say anything. Lily saw the bear when Doc brought her to see the room. She looked at it for a long moment. She picked it up. She looked at it. She looked at Lou, who was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed and his expression carefully arranged into something neutral. She said, "What is his name?" Lou said, "That is up to you." She thought about it with the seriousness she brought to everything that mattered. Then she said, "His name is Louis." Lou's expression did not change. "That is a good name," he said. He turned around and went back to the main room. Later that day, Cody, who had been in the back room doing something with the window that was letting in a draft, came out and said to Bear in a low voice that Lou was standing in the parking lot outside and had been standing there for about 5 minutes without doing anything. Bear said he knew. He did not go out to the parking lot. Some things a man needed 5 minutes with. The right thing to do was to let him have them. Earl did the smallest thing and the biggest thing. He went out behind the clubhouse to the strip of grass that ran along the fence, the place where nothing grew particularly well because the caliche was too close to the surface and the water ran off instead of in, and he dug with his hands in a small patch of dirt that got morning sun. He dug for about 20 minutes. He buried something there. He patted the dirt back down. He stood for a moment. Then he came back inside. Nobody asked what he had buried. They knew. They all knew. It was the kind of thing that did not need to be said, the kind of thing that said itself. It was the 7 years, the weight of the keeping, the promise he had made and honored, and the cost of honoring it, and the long silence of all those twice yearly visits to a woman and a child he was not supposed to know about, and the grief of watching something grow up at a distance, and the specific grief of not being able to say any of it to the people who should have been saying it with him. He buried all of that in the dirt behind the clubhouse in a spot that got morning sun. When he came back in, Lily was at the table. She looked at him. She looked at his hands, which still had dirt on them, and she said, "What were you doing?" "Gardening," Earl said. She looked at his hands again. "Did you plant something?" "Something like that," Earl said. She accepted this without pressing it further, the way she accepted things that came from Earl specifically with a particular patience, as if she understood that Earl's information came out in its own time and could not be hurried. She went back to her drawing. Earl went to the sink and washed his hands. Bear watched all of this from the table. He watched Earl dry his hands and come sit down. He watched Lily draw for a moment without looking up. He thought about the 7 years and about the things you carry and about what it feels like to set them down. I thought it probably felt in the immediate aftermath, not like relief, but like the absence of a weight so familiar you had forgotten you were carrying it. And then a little later, like something else, something closer to the thing the weight had been keeping you from feeling. I thought Earl was going to be okay. I thought they were all going to be okay. The first week passed, and then the second, and then the first month. October became November, and the Arizona mornings got colder. In the way they get colder in the desert quickly and completely, the warmth of summer ending almost overnight and the spare dry cold of the desert winter arriving in its place. Lily adjusted to this without complaint, acquiring a heavier jacket from a shopping trip that she had attended with Cody and that she reported on in detail upon returning. Focused primarily on a display of mechanical pencils she had seen and the specific qualities of each one. She had opinions. She had always had opinions, but she was acquiring the vocabulary to express them in more detail as she settled into the routines of the clubhouse and the company of the men in it, and each day she said things that were a little more elaborate and a little more fully hers than the day before. She had her mother's vocabulary. She had her mother's precision with words. She used them the way her mother had used them to say exactly what she meant and nothing more and nothing less without hedging and without performing. Bear found this each time it happened, startling in a way that did not diminish. I was sitting with her at the table one afternoon in November when she said without looking up from the drawing she was working on, "Do you think my mommy knew about this room?" Bear looked at her. "What do you mean?" "This room, the yellow. Do you think she knew it would be yellow?" Bear thought about it. "I think she knew the people in it," he said. "I think she trusted the people in it to do the right things." Lily considered this. "She knew you would paint it yellow," she said. It was not quite a question. "I think she knew someone would," Bear said. "Because she told me to find you," Lily said. "And she knew what you would do." She put down her pencil and looked at him. "She knew everything you would do before you did it." Bear looked at her. "She usually did," he said. Lily picked her pencil back up. "I think I want to be like that," she said. "When I am grown up, I want to know what people are going to do before they do it." Bear said, "Your mother worked very hard at that. She paid attention to everything, all the time." "I pay attention," Lily said. "Yes," Bear said, "you do." She looked up at him briefly, and the look had something in it that was both pleased and unsurprised, and then she went back to her drawing. November became December, and the Christmas preparations began, and the clubhouse, which had always been a functional space rather than a comfortable one, acquired over the course of several weeks a series of small additions that changed the quality of it in ways that were difficult to name precisely, but that were unmistakable. A mat at the front door because Lily had said her feet got cold on the concrete. A reading lamp in the corner near the couch because she liked to look at books in the evening and the overhead light was too harsh. A hook by the back room door at exactly the right height for a 5-year-old's jacket because she had mentioned twice that there was nowhere to put her jacket and she had to leave it on the chair. These things appeared without ceremony. Nobody announced them. Nobody pointed them out. They were just there one day, having been placed there by hands that did not require acknowledgement for the placing. Lily noticed each of them. She said nothing about them either, but she used the mat and the lamp and the hook, and when she used them, she was careful with them, in the way she was careful with things that had been given without being asked for. She understood the language these things were spoken in. She had grown up with a woman who spoke it fluently. The weeks moved toward Christmas, and on Christmas Eve, Lou made a pie in addition to the ham apple because Lily had said at some point that she liked apple pie, and Lou had noted it and produced the pie at the end of the meal without comment on when or how he had learned to make it, which Bear suspected was recent and involved the same anxious private preparation as the ham, but decided not to investigate. The pie was excellent. Lily had 2 slices. Lou's expression when she finished the second slice was the expression of a man who has accomplished something he is privately very pleased about and is determined not to let anyone see how pleased he is, which meant that everyone could see it perfectly clearly but knew better than to say so. Doc watched all of this and smiled the way Doc smiled when he was seeing something he had not expected, and that was better than what he had expected. A smile that started in the eyes and arrived at the mouth last. The fire in the corner burned down slowly. Outside, the lights Cody had strung along the fence went on shining their thin yellow lines through the window, and the desert night was cold and clear and enormous. And the stars above it were what they always were, and inside the room was warm with people and the smell of pee and the particular quality of ease that settles into a space when the people in it have been through something hard together and have arrived at the other side of it and are beginning to understand what the other side feels like. It feels like this, Bear thought. It feels like 5 men and a little girl and a fire and a guitar and a pie that a man spent 3 weeks privately anxious about, and a bear named Lewis at the foot of a bed in a yellow room, and a name carved into the corner of a wooden chair. It feels like enough. It feels like exactly enough. And outside the stars went on burning above the desert floor. Too many of them extravagant and unnecessary, and completely right the way things are. Sometimes that have no reason to be as good as they are, and simply are anyway without explanation, without apology, steady and present and there. Hal Decker drove down from Prescott on a Thursday. I was 68 years old, bald on top with white at the sides, built like a man who had been strong once and had stayed that way through stubbornness rather than effort. He drove a 10-year-old Ford pickup that needed new brakes and did not seem to care about needing them. He parked it in the lot without being told where to park and came to the door and knocked twice evenly. The knock of a man who has done his business at many doors and knows that how you knock tells people what kind of man you are before you have said a single word. Bear let him in. Decker took the room in the way men of a certain profession and a certain age take rooms without appearing to cataloging everything in the time it took to shake a hand. He shook Bear's hand. He shook Doc's. He nodded at Lou and Cody and Earl with the economy of a man who does not use words or gestures when a nod will do the same job. He accepted coffee. He sat down at the table and put his reading glasses on. Bear slid the laptop across to him. Decker, read. He read for 45 minutes without saying a word and without making sounds while he read. He turned the pages with one finger. He went back twice to sections he had already passed, reading them a second time with the particular attention of someone checking their own understanding against the text. His expression was the expression of a man reading something he has been half expecting for a long time and is not pleased to find confirmed, but is not surprised to find confirmed either, which is a different thing from being pleased and a different thing again from being surprised. When he finished, he took his glasses off. He folded them. He set them on the table beside the laptop. Where's the girl, he said. Back room, Bear said. She is at the table drawing pictures. She is safe. She is safe. Decker nodded. He looked at the laptop. The woman who built this, she did it alone. She did it alone, 7 years, starting when the baby was still in her. I was quiet for a moment. He seemed to be measuring something internal, the distance between what the file represented and what it was going to take to turn it into something that moved through the world and stuck. 47 pages, he said. Yes, she had 3 names from the Nevada crew. 3 names, photographs of 2 of them, dates of payment going back to the month Cole was killed. And Pruitt, 9 years of records, 11 payments, cross-reference to 2 other accounts that feed into a third one. She traced the money back to its source and forward to its recipients. She did not miss anything I can see. Decker looked at the ceiling for a moment, not dramatically. The way a man looks at a ceiling when he is measuring the distance between what he has in front of him and what it is going to take to make it move through the right channels at the right speed without getting lost or buried or neutralized by the people who would want it neutralized. Then he looked at Bear. I am going to need the originals. When Bear said, now, not now. Bear met his eyes. When I know the people you are giving it to are the right people. Decker looked at him. You are going to tell me who the right people are. I'm going to ask you to tell me, and then I am going to verify. Bear set both hands flat on the table. Maddie Keller spent 7 years verifying everything she put in that file. I am not going to hand it to the first man who comes through the door, regardless of what he is carrying. Something shifted in Decker's face, not offense. Something that looked, if Bear read it right, like a specific kind of respect that comes from recognizing something in another person that you recognize from yourself. The stubbornness of a man who does not take shortcuts with things that matter. Fine, Decker said. 3 names, federal. None of them are in Pruitt's orbit or adjacent to it. I will give you their information and you check what you can in 48 hours and then we move. 48 hours, Bear said. After that, the window starts to close. Pruitt has people who watch for unusual activity. If he gets a hint that this is moving, he will start shredding. He will not get a hint from us. You sure? Bear looked at him steadily. I kept my mouth shut about things that cost me for 7 years, he said. I know how to not say things. Decker looked at him for another moment. Then he nodded. He took a receipt from his shirt pocket and wrote 3 names on the back of it and pushed it across the table. He stood up. He picked up his glasses. He looked at the laptop one more time. That woman, he said. He said it quietly, almost to himself, the way a man says something he is saying for his own benefit as much as for anyone else in the room. What she built in 7 years alone. Yes, Bear said. It is something. Decker left. Bear sat at the table with the receipt in his hand. Doc looked at him. Do you trust him? I trust that he has been wanting to pull this thread for 20 years, and Maddie just handed him the end of it, Bear said. A man who has wanted something that long and finally has it in front of him does not have any incentive to let it disappear. He has every incentive to make it hold. He put the receipt in his shirt pocket. That is enough trust for now. He made 3 calls that afternoon. 2 of the names Decker had given him checked out through channels he was not going to describe in detail to anyone. The 3rd name he ran past a man in Phoenix who owed him a favor from a decade ago involving a situation that had required discretion and had received it, and who confirmed in 3 sentences without being asked to expand on them, that the third name was as clean as names got in that part of the federal system. He called Decker at 6 in the evening. Move, he said. Decker said, give me 72 hours. Bear said, you have 60. He hung up. That night, he sat on the concrete step outside the clubhouse front door. The air was cold and dry, and the sky above the Arizona flats was enormous and dense with stars, the kind of sky that makes you feel the actual size of the night, rather than just the dark of it. The kind of sky that puts the particular smallness of any one man's particular problems into a perspective that is at once humbling and strangely reassuring. He had a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He held it anyway. The door opened behind him. I did not turn around. He knew the step. Earl sat down beside him. They did not say anything for a while. 23 years of knowing each other had worn the discomfort out of their silences. When Earl was quiet beside Bear, it meant Earl was thinking something through and had not yet arrived at the point where saying it out loud was necessary. Bear was familiar with this and did not press it. After a while, Earl said, you are doing it her way. Yes, she would have wanted that. I know. Cole would have wanted the other way. Bear looked at the stars. He thought about this. Cole would have wanted the other way, yes. Cole would have found the 3 men from the SUV and settled it before breakfast and felt right about it, and he would not have been entirely wrong to feel right about it. Some things deserve to be settled quickly and directly. He was quiet for a moment. But Cole is not here, and Maddie left 47 pages. She had 7 years to think about how to end this, and she chose paper and names and records over anything else. She chose the method that would last after she was gone. She chose the method that could not be undone. Earl said, you think she knew she was going to die? I think she was 36 years old, and she was in a yellow house with a little girl, and people who wanted to find her had been getting closer for months. And I think she was too smart and too careful to not have a plan for what happened if they got close enough. He turned the cold coffee in his hands. I think she made the file permanent so it would outlast whatever happened to her. I think she sewed it into the rabbit's ear so that the one person she knew she could trust completely, a 5-year-old girl who did not know what she was carrying, would carry it here safely. And I think she wrote that note on the back of the photograph because she wanted us to know that she knew, that she had faith in us, even after everything. Earl was quiet for a long moment. She found you, he said. She found us, Bear said. The night was very still. Somewhere out past the fence line, something moved in the scrub and then was still. After a while, Earl said, what happens to Lily? Bear did not answer immediately. He looked at the stars. He let the question sit for a moment the way you let a question sit when you have already answered it in your own mind and you are just deciding how to say it out loud. She stays, he said. Earl looked at him. She stays here. With us. Bear looked at the sky. Cole's daughter, Maddie's daughter, she stays. Bear, the law is not going to just... I know what the law says, Bear said. I also know a lawyer in Phoenix who is very good at the specific things she does. And I know that a child whose only adult connections are men with a clean legal business record, a legitimately registered motorcycle repair and salvage operation with 20 years of tax filings and no outstanding criminal matters is not a child without options. He paused. I called her this morning. Earl looked at him. You called her this morning while you were outside. Earl sat with this. He looked at the gravel. He looked at the road. He said, she is going to need more than a clubhouse. Then we will give her more than a clubhouse. Bear said it simply, not as a boast, as a statement of a thing that had been decided and was going to happen. We will figure out what she needs, and we will figure out how to provide it. That is what we do. We have always figured that out. Earl said nothing else, but he did not argue. For a man like Earl, not arguing about something that mattered was the strongest agreement he had. They sat on the step for another 20 minutes, and then they went back inside. The 60 hours passed. They passed in the specific way that hours pass when you are waiting for something that you cannot speed up and cannot skip slowly, and with enormous attention to everything that is happening around you. Bear slept in 4-hour intervals. He ate when eating was necessary. He watched the road. He watched the phone. He watched Lily. Lily in those 60 hours filled the clubhouse with something it had not contained in a long time. Not noise. She was in fact a remarkably quiet child for her age, with the internal self-sufficiency of someone who had grown up in a small house with a mother who was often occupied with serious things and who had learned to entertain herself without requiring an audience. But what she brought was a kind of attention, a presence, the quality of being genuinely looked at by someone who was genuinely curious about what they saw. She drew pictures at the table with whatever paper Cody found for her, careful, detailed pictures of cats and rabbits in a house with yellow walls, and what appeared to be motorcycles rendered with surprising accuracy for a 5-year-old. She asked questions that were direct and that she waited patiently for the answers to. She ate what was put in front of her. She slept when she was tired and woke up when she was not, and navigated the space between with a composure that Bear found each time he saw it quietly astonishing. She called Bear by his name from the first morning, and she called the others by theirs with a formal care, as though she had been taught that names were things that had weight and should be used correctly. She called Earl by his name last. She had looked at him with the most careful of her assessments, the slowest and the most thorough. Bear had watched her do it and had thought that she was seeing something in Earl that was specific to her, something that her mother had described or something that she recognized from the twice-yearly visits she was too young to remember clearly, but not too young to have absorbed. On the second day, she went to Earl while he was sitting alone at the table, and she stood next to him and said without preamble, "You used to visit." Earl looked at her. "Yes, I remember," she said. "You smelled like motor oil." Earl's expression did something it did not usually do. "I probably still do," he said. She nodded. "I know," she said, and she went back to her drawing. Earl sat at the table for a long time after that. On the morning of the second day, a state police captain named Warren Pruitt drove to work and found 3 men from the federal government waiting in his office. 2 of them he recognized from a division he had worked adjacent to for 9 years. One of them he did not recognize, which was in its way the most significant detail of the morning, because in his 9 years of working adjacent to that division, he had made it his business to know who the people were. And not knowing this one meant someone had specifically chosen someone he would not know. The press release went out that afternoon. Health concerns, a personal decision after a long and distinguished career. The language was clean and measured and said almost nothing about anything specific, which was exactly the kind of language that is used when the specific things cannot be said publicly yet, and when everyone involved has agreed that discretion serves more people than detail. Bear read it on his phone in the lot behind the clubhouse. He sent Decker one text. It said receipt. Decker sent back, "Keep watching. More coming." Bear went back inside. He waited until Lily was in the back room with Cody, who had discovered that she was interested in how engines worked and had begun explaining it using drawings on the back of cardboard box panels. Then he told the others. Lou let out a long breath. Doc nodded once. Earl looked at the table and then looked at the door and then looked at the table again. Nobody celebrated. That was not what this was. Pruitt was one part. There were other parts. 8 days after Decker's visit, 2 names from the document were arrested in separate cities on the same morning. The arrests were quiet, the kind of arrest that happen when the preparation has been done completely incorrectly. No press outside the courthouse. No statements. Both men requested their lawyers immediately. Bear and Doc sat at the table and read the news accounts. And Doc poured 2 inches of whiskey into 2 glasses, and that was the extent of the acknowledgement. They drank it, and Doc put the bottle away, and they sat for a while in the quiet of the late night before going to their respective beds. The third and fourth names took longer. 7 weeks in one case, 11 in the other. The federal agent whose name was in the file resigned before formal charges could be filed, but the conditions of the resignation were not disclosed to the press, and Decker's message made clear that they were thorough and permanent. The Nevada crew that had killed Cole had dissolved years before. 3 of its members were located, 2 were already in prison on separate matters, and the investigation added significantly to both sentences. The third was located and then was simply no longer locatable. Bear did not ask about the third one. The black SUV did not return. Bear watched for it for 3 weeks before allowing himself to read its absence as significant. After 5 weeks, he was certain enough to stop watching with the specific quality of attention he had been giving the road. After 6 weeks, he told the others. Lou said, "Good." That was sufficient. The machinery that Maddie had spent 7 years building the case against was making different sounds now. The sounds of something winding down from the inside. Bear thought about her in the yellow house. He thought about her at the kitchen table at 11 at night with Lily, asleep in the next room, going through documents with the careful, systematic attention of someone who understood that the difference between a case that holds and a case that falls apart is in the details, and she was not going to let it fall apart. He thought about her doing this for 7 years. He thought about what it cost her and what she gave up and what she decided somewhere in those 7 years that all of it was worth doing for the sake of what came after. I thought that she had been right. I thought that Cole would have told her she was right if Cole had known. He thought that Cole would have been furious with her for doing it alone and would have told her so at considerable volume and then would have sat down and told her she was right. The legal process moved forward through the fall. The lawyer in Phoenix was very good at the specific things she did, and she moved the paperwork through the relevant channels with a combination of patience and insistence that gets things done without burning the relationships that need to remain intact for the next step. A home study was completed, documents were filed and reviewed, questions were asked and answered. The process had its own pace, and Bear did not try to accelerate it past what it could bear. Lily watched all of this with the same patient attention she brought to everything else. She understood at the level that 5-year-olds understand complicated things, that something was happening that had to do with her and that the adults in her life were managing it. She seemed to decide that managing it was what adults were for, and that her job was to be herself as clearly and straightforwardly as possible and let the adults proceed. She was very good at that. She told Bear one afternoon while he was going over paperwork at the table and she was drawing at the other end of it that her mother had told her a story about him. Bear set the papers down. What story? She said that when my daddy first brought her to meet everyone, she was scared. She said she had never been around that many people at once, who all knew each other and she did not know any of them. Lily drew a careful line. She said she looked around the room and she was looking for the person who was the most like a wall. Bear said a wall. She said a wall does not move. She said a wall is not scared of things that come at it. She said she needed to find the person who was most like a wall so she would know where to stand. Lily looked up at him. She said she found you right away. Bear looked at her. She said you were the wall, Lily said. She looked back at her drawing. She said that was a very good thing. She said walls are important. Bear sat with this for a while. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle and lay across the table in a warm rectangle. He said, your mother was a smart woman. I know, Lily said. She said it's simply the way you state a fact that is so established, it does not require emphasis. She was the smartest person I knew. She was smarter than everyone. She paused. Except maybe you are also very smart. Bear said, I am not as smart as she was. Lily considered this seriously. That is okay, she said. You can be the wall. She can be the smart one. You do not both have to be the same thing. Bear looked at her for a moment. He thought about how much of her mother was already in her, the directness, the clarity, the way she assembled the world into something that made sense and then reported on it without apology. He said, that is a very good point. She nodded satisfied and went back to her drawing. 6 months after Lily had knocked on the door with her small knuckles doing their best to sound grown up, a judge in Maricopa County signed an order. What it said, stripped of its legal language, was that Lily Keller was staying. Bear stood in the courthouse parking lot afterward. The lawyer shook his hand and said several things about timelines and follow-up filings that he noted and would remember. Doc clapped him on the shoulder. Earl drove back ahead of them, and when they got to the clubhouse, there was a grilled cheese sandwich on the table cut into 4 squares, with the crusts removed, and Lily was sitting in her chair eating it with both hands. She looked up when Bear came in. The lady said, I can stay, she said. The judge, Bear said. Yes. She had a very organized desk, Lily said, for a judge. She is a very organized woman. Can I keep my room yellow? You can do whatever you want with your room. She nodded satisfied and went back to her sandwich. Bear sat down across from her. He watched her eat. He thought about all the things that had happened in the 6 months since she appeared on the step with her laces undone and her one-eyed rabbit, and he thought that none of them individually had felt as large as this moment, which was small and quiet and ordinary. A little girl eating a grilled cheese sandwich in a room that was now her home. She looked up at him. Bear, she said. Yeah. Do you miss my daddy? The question landed the way the big questions always land, without warning, in the middle of ordinary things. Bear looked at her. He thought about Cole. He thought about the bike in the photograph and the scratch on the left fender that Cole had never fixed because Maddie put it there, and he had thought it was funny. He thought about Cole at this table 10 years ago, 20 years ago, at various points along the length of a friendship that had assumed it would keep going. Every day, Bear said. Lily nodded. She looked at her sandwich for a moment. Me too, she said. Even though I never met him. My mommy told me stories about him. She paused. She said he was very loud. How was loud, Bear said. Very loud. He could not help it. Everything he felt came out at full volume. It was not something he ever learned to manage, and I am not sure he tried. She said he was funny. How was funny? Sometimes on purpose and sometimes not, but either way, it was funny. Lily's mouth curved. She said he cried at movies. He would deny that if he were here, but yes, he did. She said he pretended he was not, but she could always tell. She could always tell everything, Bear said. That was Maddie. You could not get much past her. Lily picked up the last square of her sandwich. She held it for a moment. Then she said he would have loved me. Bear looked at her. The afternoon light was in her hair. She had Cole's jaw. She had Maddie's eyes and Cole's jaw in the particular set of both of them that made her completely and specifically herself. Yes, Bear said, he would have loved you very much. She ate the last square. She drank her milk. She slid off her chair and took her plate to the sink the way she had been shown, and then she came back through the kitchen doorway and stopped there. Bear, she said. Yeah. Thank you for knowing what to do. She went to find her rabbit. Bear sat at the table in the quiet of the late afternoon, and he did not say anything for a long time, and he did not need to. Some moments do not require anything added to them. They are complete as they are, and the right thing to do with them is to let them be what they are. After a while, Doc came in. He sat down across from Bear. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Bear, and they sat there in the particular quiet of two men who have known each other for a very long time and have recently been through something large together and are on the other side of it now and are finding that the other side of it is quieter than expected and not unpleasant. Doc said, you thought about what you were going to tell her, about her mother, all of it, when she is old enough. Yes, Bear said, and I am going to tell her the truth. He picked up the coffee. All of it. The way it happened, the way it was complicated, the things that people did wrong and the reasons they did them, and the things that people did right and the costs of those, too. I am going to tell her that her mother was one of the strongest people I ever knew, and that she spent 7 years building something that changed a lot of things that needed changing, and that she did it alone, and that is extraordinary. He set the cup down, and I am going to tell her that her father was a good man who was loud and funny, and who loved her mother completely and without reservation. And I am going to tell her that when she walked into this room at 5 years old with her laces untied, she was already more like both of them than she probably knows. Doc was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she is going to be something. Yes, Bear said, she is. September came. On the first day of school, Earl drove her in his truck. He drove carefully, which was not how Earl usually drove. She sat in the passenger seat with her backpack in her lap, the cartoon flowers on it worn now from months of use, and she was wearing new sneakers because the pink ones had finally given out, and the new ones were blue with yellow laces. She had chosen herself at the store and insisted on tying herself, which took longer but was important to her. Earl parked in the school lot. He got out. He opened her door. She climbed down and stood next to the truck and looked at the school building with the patient, assessing expression she brought to everything new, the expression of someone taking a complete inventory before committing to an opinion. Then she looked up at Earl. Are you going to wait? She said. For a little while, he said. You do not have to. I know. She nodded. She started toward the front doors. She went 3 steps and stopped and turned back. Earl, she said. Yeah, kid. You can wait as long as you want. She went inside. Earl stood in the parking lot with his arms crossed and his eyes on the doors that had closed behind her. He stood there through the morning bell. He stood there for 30 minutes after it. He stood there until the lot was empty of other parents and the school had gone quiet with the specific quiet of a building in which children are doing the work of being taught things. Then he got in the truck. He drove back to the clubhouse. He came inside. He sat down. He did not say anything about the morning. Nobody asked. Christmas that year was louder than the clubhouse had been in several years. Cody found a string of lights and put them up along the fence outside with the specific energy of a young man who is genuinely happy about something and is channeling it into a task that gives that happiness a shape. Some of the lights did not work. He replaced those bulbs one at a time until all of them worked. He stood back and looked at the result and seemed satisfied. Lou announced in early December that he was going to make a ham for Christmas dinner. This announcement was received with a silence that Lou chose to interpret as enthusiasm. He then spent 3 weeks in a state of very private anxiety about the ham consulting cookbooks he purchased and did not leave visible, making phone calls to people he would not name, and taking one trip to a kitchen supply store 2 towns over that he also chose not to volunteer information about. The ham was exceptional. Lou received almost no acknowledgement of this because he made it clear that acknowledgement was not necessary, which everyone understood to mean that acknowledgement was welcome as long as it was not too direct. So they expressed it through second helpings and through a particular quality of silence that a man who has cooked something and wants it to be appreciated recognizes, and Lou seemed to find this sufficient. Doc brought his guitar. He had not brought it to a gathering in 4 years because there had not been the right kind of occasion, and Doc was not a man who played at the wrong occasion. There was the right kind of occasion now, and he had known it was coming for several weeks and had tuned the guitar carefully the night before. They pushed the table back after dinner and brought in extra chairs and sat in a rough circle in the main room with the plates pushed aside and the lights from outside coming through the window in thin yellow lines, and Doc played. He played old songs, the kind of songs that have been played so many times in so many rooms by so many people that they have become part of the air itself, the kind of songs that sit in the body rather than the mind, and that move through the chest rather than the ear. Nobody sang. None of them could sing with any real competence, and none of them pretended otherwise. But they all listened in the particular way that men listen to music they are not going to admit affects them very still present, letting it do what it is going to do without interfering. Lily sat between Bear and Earl. She had the rabbit in her lap. She was very serious about the music listening, with her head tilted slightly to the left and her hands folded on the rabbit's worn body. Partway through the second song, she leaned against Bear's arm, just lightly, just the weight of a small shoulder against a large arm barely perceptible present. He did not move. He let her stay there. After dinner, Bear brought out the wooden chair. It had stood in the corner of the main room for as long as any of them could remember, a straight-back chair with a worn seat and armrest that had been refinished twice and would need refinishing again before long. Bear had spent 2 evenings in the week before Christmas with a small knife, and in the lower right corner of the seat, carved into the wood, in letters precise enough to read clearly and small enough to be unobtrusive, was a name. Lily. She found it after dinner. She was sitting in it, and she reached down and ran her fingers along the underside of the seat's edge, the way children explore furniture that has been designated as theirs, wanting to know all of it. She stopped when she felt the letters. She bent forward to look. She read it. Then she raised her right hand and she put her fingertip on the first letter. She traced it slowly, carefully, each letter in turn following the carved lines the way her finger had followed the lines of the tattoo on Bear's forearm. The first night she walked in with the particular attention of someone tracing something they already know by heart because they have been told about it and have held it in their mind for a long time before they were finally allowed to touch it. The way Maddie used to trace things. The way Maddie had traced the design on that torn piece of notebook paper, pushing it across a diner table to Bear 23 years ago, with her coffee cup still in her other hand. Lily looked up at Bear. Like yours, she said. Like the tattoo. Like the tattoo, he said. She looked at each man in the room, one at a time, in the order she had always looked at them, the order she had established the first night and never varied. She looked at Bear and at Doc and at Lou and at Cody, and she looked last and longest at Earl, the way she always looked last and longest at Earl. Then she said, "Can I have one when I am older, like yours and like my mommy's?" Bear looked at Doc. Doc looked at Bear. Lou looked at the ceiling. Cody looked at his hands. Earl looked at Lily. "When you are older, sweetheart," Bear said, "we will talk about it." She nodded. She had expected that answer. Her mother had told her what the answer was going to be, and it was exactly right. She went back to tracing her name. Later, when the conversation had slowed and the music had stopped and the plates were long cleared and the lights outside were still going and the room had settled into the warm, replete quiet of people who have been fed and are together and do not need to say much, 5 men lifted whatever they were drinking. They did it without speaking, without announcement, without any of the ceremony that might make the moment into a performance rather than a true thing. One at a time, a lift and a pause and a setting back down, brief, complete. For Cole, who had been loud and funny and who had loved a woman thoroughly and who had been stopped mid-sentence at 43. For Maddie, who had been smarter than the room, and who had spent 7 years alone building something that held, and who had trusted 5 men, she was not certain she could trust with the most important thing she had. For Danny Briggs, who had been 21 and frightened, and who had made a choice he could not live with, and who had, at least in the end, tried to account for it in the only way he could see. For Vera Flynn, who had put a 5-year-old girl on a bus with a rabbit in a backpack and an address written on a piece of paper, and had trusted that the men at the end of the trip were the men Maddie had said they were. For the 7 years that were done, and for the little girl with the yellow curls, who was sitting at the head of the table with her finger on her name, who had walked into this room on a Tuesday afternoon in October with her laces undone and her rabbit under her arm, and she had not been afraid, not for one moment, because her mother had told her clearly and directly that the biggest man would have a skull and a rose on his arm, and the biggest man would know what to do. Her mother had been right. She had been right about all of it. Bear set his glass down. He looked at the room, the lights along the fence, the guitar leaning against Doc's knee, Lou's expression of satisfied containment. Cody's young face with something settled in it that had not been there 6 months ago. Earl watching Lily with the expression of a man who has been given back something he did not know he had lost. He looked at Lily. She had stopped tracing her name. She was sitting up straight in her chair with her hands folded on the rabbit, and she was looking at Bear with the same expression she had given him. The very first moment, the expression of patient, careful assessment, the expression of someone checking what is in front of them against what they were told to expect. Checking and finding it right. Bear, she said. Yeah? Is this what family feels like? Bear looked at her. He thought about the long way to answer that, and the careful way, and the qualified way that acknowledged everything the word contained, that was complicated and true and not simple. I thought about a photograph on the back of which someone had written 3 words in angular, careful handwriting. She found you. Yes, sweetheart, he said. This is exactly what it feels like. She nodded. She seemed satisfied with this the way she was satisfied with true things completely and without needing more. She turned back to her name in the wood, and she traced it one more time, all the way through from the first letter to the last, and then she folded her hands in her lap, and she looked at Doc. Then you play another one, she said. Doc looked at his guitar. He looked at her. He smiled, the full kind that he did not often allow himself, the kind that changed the whole shape of his face into something younger and less guarded. Yeah, he said, I can play another one. He played. Outside, the desert winter held the clubhouse in its enormous, cold quiet. The stars above the flats were what they always were, too many, extravagant, deliberately beyond what was strictly necessary, as though the night was making a point about how much was possible when you were not holding back. The lights along the fence came through the window in thin yellow lines, and the fire in the corner moved without hurry, and 5 men and a small girl sat in a circle, and the music moved through them, and the night held the music, and all of it held together in the way that things hold together when they have been built correctly and with care, the kind of care that takes time and costs something and is worth what it costs. Lily had her head tipped back slightly and her eyes half closed and the rabbit in her lap, and she was listening to the music with her whole body, the way children listen to something they love, without reservation, without self-consciousness, giving the whole of their attention to the thing in front of them. Bear sat beside her and said nothing and held his coffee and looked at the room. I thought Cole would have been tapping his knee off the beat, and it would have driven Doc quietly insane, and nobody would have said anything about it. He would have had his arm around her shoulders. He would have been the loudest laugh in the room at anything funny, and the first to go quiet at anything tender. And he would have told her every day, in the specific and uncomplicated language of a man who knows his own heart, what she was worth. I was not here to do that. But the people who were here were going to give her what they had. Not the same, never the same, but theirs. Their specific and individual things, Bear's steadiness and Doc's guitar, and Lou's ham cooked in 3 weeks of private anxiety, and Cody's engine diagrams on cardboard, and Earl's willingness to stand in a parking lot for an hour without being asked to. Lily was going to hold all of that. She was going to be fine, more than fine. Doc played the last note of the song and let it ring until it was done, and then he set the guitar aside and leaned back, and nobody said anything for a while. The room was warm, and the night outside was cold, and the lights along the fence were on, and the fire was burning down slowly. After a while, Lily said, without opening her eyes all the way, I am going to learn to play that. Doc looked at her. The guitar. Yes. All right, he said. Will you teach me? Yes, he said, I will teach you. She opened her eyes fully then, and she smiled at him. The open, complete smile that she gave to true things, and she settled back, and she closed her eyes again, and she listened to the silence that comes after music, the particular silence that holds the shape of the music for a little while before it disperses entirely. Bear sat beside her and said nothing, and looked at the room and let the night do what the night was doing, which was holding them all in its enormous dark, while the stars above the desert floor went on, being what they always were, more than enough, more than you could have asked for, present and burning and too numerous to count. The 5 cups on the table caught the light from the fence in small yellow circles. The jacket that had covered Lily the first night she slept on the couch was folded on the arm of it, now where Doc had put it and where it had stayed, as if it had found the right place and decided to stay there. Bear looked at it, he looked at the couch, he looked at the photograph on the wall, the one Lily had found and put her finger on the first afternoon, the one with Cole in the center grinning with his whole face. I thought she found you. I thought yes, she did. I thought we are going to take care of her. I thought that is enough. That is exactly enough. That is the whole of what is needed and the whole of what is possible, and it is enough to last, and it is going to last. Outside, the Arizona winter held everything in its enormous cold quiet, and the stars went on burning, and the lights along the fence went on shining their thin yellow lines through the window. And inside the room was warm, and the music's silence was still there, and Lily was asleep again, her head tipped against Bear's arm, with the rabbit held against her chest, and her face smooth and unguarded and at rest. Her mother had told her the men with the patches would know what to do. Her mother had been right. Bear had a habit in the months after Lily settled in of walking the perimeter of the lot in the early evening before the light was fully gone. He had done it before, years before, when Cole was still alive, and the club was in a different season of itself, when the walking was less meditation than surveillance. He had done it then out of habit and out of the particular restlessness of a man who did not know how to stand still for long. He did it now differently. He did it slowly. He did it the way a man does something when he is paying attention to it rather than just doing it. The lot was not large. It took 3 minutes to walk. He walked it in 10. He looked at the fence and the road and the sky above the road and the desert beyond the fence, and he thought about the things that had happened and the things that were ongoing and the things that were done. He thought about the 47 pages and about Decker and about the 3 copies that had gone to the right places. He thought about a retired captain in a dissolved crew and 3 names that were no longer in a position to be threats to anyone. I thought about Lily doing her addition problems at the table. I thought about a small yellow room with rabbit sheets on the bed. I thought about Earl's hands in the dirt behind the clubhouse. I thought about Doc's guitar and Lou's ham and Cody's cardboard engine diagrams and the stuffed bear named Lewis sitting at the foot of the bed in the yellow room. I thought about a photograph with 3 words written on the back of it. She found you. He walked the perimeter of the lot in the early evening, and he thought about all of these things, and then usually by the time he had come back around to the front door, he was done thinking about them, and he went inside. He went inside to wherever Lily was and whatever she was doing, and whatever questions she had that needed answering, or whatever drawing she was working on, or whatever meal was being prepared, and he was present for it, fully present. The way he had been trying to be present for things his whole life, and had sometimes managed and sometimes not. He managed it now. He managed it because there was something to be present for that was new and specific in his, and that asked for his presence in a way he could respond to. I had not known he was waiting for that. I had not known until it arrived. She found you. Yes, Bear thought, on one of those evening walks with the sun going down fast the way it went down in December and the cold coming in off the desert in its dry, complete way. Yes, she did. And I was here. And I am going to keep being here. That is the whole of it. That is enough. I went inside. Lily looked up from the table where she was sitting with Lou, the 2 of them doing something with a deck of cards that was not the same game. Bear and the others played a simpler game, a game with rules she could follow, and rules that Lou had apparently learned or invented for the occasion. She looked at Bear. You went for your walk, she said. Yes, he said. Good, she said, and went back to the cards. Bear poured himself a coffee. He sat down at the table. He watched Lou explain something about the cards with a patience that Bear had not previously known Lou to possess, and that was apparently something that had come from somewhere Bear had not been looking. He drank his coffee. The evening settled around them. The lights along the fence were on. The fire was going. Everything that needed to be was where it was supposed to be.